People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
That's what's so interesting about monsters. Most monsters are victims.
How do you do? I'm Christopher Lee.
Tall, handsome, arrogant,
imperious,
powerful.
Ooh, he must be scary to meet.
He went from tiny parts in swashbuckler movies in the early 50s to working with George Lucas and working with Peter Jackson. I mean, the most respected directors in the world.
You put that in perspective with his wartime experiences, and so what?
It was very intense. It marked him.
There is some mystery attached to his work during the war and immediately after it.
He was involved with a lot of sabotage and targeted assassinations, which, of course, the British government doesn't know anything about.
The British film industry was at its zenith, particularly after the war. There was a great hunger to create new stars.
Everyone will always remember him as Dracula.
Great things were expected of him, and here he was playing monsters.
It had got him recognition, but it also was the sort of thing that he could never leave behind and that so many people thought was all he could do.
He once said to me that he pitied me because I had seen so many of his movies.
He wanted to move on from that.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with Jon Spira. He is the director and writer of the new film, The Life and Deaths of Christopher Lee. You've heard Jon on the show before. Most recently, he was on the Morons from Outer Space episode. You can pre-order the Blu-ray of The Life and Deaths of Christopher Lee over at Kickstarter. I will provide a link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this interview. Jon Spira, how did you get involved in this project around Christopher Lee?
I generated the project. It was my idea to do the project. The original kind of conception, really, was there right from the get-go, from the kind of earliest genesis of an idea kind of came from me. In a weird way, I always worked with my producer, Hank Stars, about 50-50 on everything, really, which is unfair. The director always gets the credit for stuff, although they also get the blame. So it's all right. But Hank is always there from day one as well. And he's my kind of closest creative confidant as well. So we would never do a project that both of us weren't excited about. So we had just finished our last project, which was our first TV series, which was called Real Britannia, which was the modern history of British cinema in 4-hour-long episodes. We had to do that in something like 8 months. It was really ridiculous. Everything from researching, writing, the whole thing had to be done really quickly. And we're really happy with it, but we ran ourselves into the ground doing it. We were exhausted. So when it finished, he went off to the Bahamas or somewhere, and I just took to the sofa, basically. And I just decided that for 2 weeks, I was going to do absolutely nothing, like nothing. I wasn't going to look at my computer. I was going to do no work. I was just going to just exist and sleep when I wanted to sleep and that kind of thing. I hit the sofa and I got really addicted to watching old episodes of This Is Your Life on YouTube, which you had that in the States.
Oh, yeah.
You definitely had it in like the 50s and kind of 60s. And in this country, it carried on right into the kind of 90s, maybe even further. So I was just watching episodes of that, which I found really interesting because I'm interested in biography. I'm interested in interview. I'm interested in cultural figures. And This Is Your Life is such a weird way of doing it. There's nothing quite like it. Over here, we have a great radio show called Desert Island Discs, which is a great way of getting into somebody's life in a non-traditional way. And I think that's what This Is Your Life does, because it's not the person who it's about doesn't really get to speak the whole way through the show. It's just stuff that they presented to them. And you see them put into these kind of situations where they don't know what's going to quite happen. And so it's great. It's a really good show. You've probably seen the Laurel and Hardy and Boris Karloff episodes, really wonderful things. And the British version is hilarious because in the 80s we had such bad celebrities. So plowing through those, and then it came up, next video, Christopher Lee. And I was just like, I'm on board for this. I would love to see this. And I'd read his autobiography a couple of years earlier, and I'd really enjoyed that. It's a really well-written book. And the thing that's surprising about it is that it's written in a very self-deprecating manner. Anyway, so I'd enjoyed this book, and I was very excited to see This Is Your Life. And it was a really kind of shocking thing to watch because actually it looked like he was having a horrible time. He really was having a horrible time, actually. And when you watch it, and it's worth watching, it's on YouTube, if you really look at his face, he is absolutely panicked from beginning to end. He does not like it. And in fact, if you've read his book, at one point they bring out like his old army friends. But actually, if the researcher had done their job, they would have realized that these men bullied him when he was in the army. And even they cut his wife at one point, who looks furious that these men are there. And what really struck me was it was such a strange episode. And what was particularly strange about it was that he clearly is someone who was used to controlling his own narrative. And to not be in control was deeply upsetting to him. And if you actually listen to it, there are parts where people are clapping or people are laughing or his microphone's down. But if you listen to him, like there's a bit where they bring Oliver Reed out. God, you wouldn't want Oliver Reed brought out on your This Is Your Life. And especially 80s Oliver Reed. And you actually hear him telling a story. And if you listen, Christopher Lee's kind of correcting him while he's talking. It was really weird. And I just thought, what an interesting man and what a fascinating. There's just something there. I was immediately struck, because I watched it twice, by the idea that there's something there. And I'm not sure what it is, but there's something there. And very quickly after that, we were in a situation where one of the people who funds our work, or has funded our work before, basically said they were looking for a documentary about an iconic British person. And so I was just like, can we do Christopher Lee? And it panned out. And then when I started doing the research into it, it was all there. There are so many legends about Christopher Lee. And the thing that's fun about it is that the most unlikely ones are true. And the ones that people most bandy about aren't true. But he didn't ever disavow people's notions, because he liked having this kind of mystique around him and this kind of air of legend around him. And as soon as you start thinking Christopher Lee and you actually look at the facts and you look at the careers, it's amazing that nobody's made a proper documentary about him before. It's ridiculous, because he holds the world record for the most appearances in a film. Like, he's more acting roles than anybody else. And he, as the film goes into, he had this ridiculous life before he even got into film. And then he had a film career that spanned 8 decades, which started with him in uncredited roles fighting Errol Flynn and ended with him in Lord of the Rings. There's no one like that.
Where did the idea for the style come from? Because you do it in such an interesting way. You've got animation, computer graphics, the puppetry, of course, so many different styles, but it all comes together so beautifully.
I knew from the get-go that he's the thing that's so fascinating when you think about Christopher Lee. The other day I was reading something about condition synesthesia, where people hear sounds and see colors. And I was thinking about that a lot. And I was thinking that when you think about people, you almost think about them in a constant. You could assign color or a feeling or a tone to like their whole career. But actually, if you look at Christopher Lee's career and his life, it's madly colorful. There's a lot of people who just go, oh, he was Dracula in the Hammer films. And now there's a lot of people who go, oh, he was the guy in Star Wars, or he was the guy in Lord of the Rings. But the truth is, he had all of these amazing periods of work where he was in those great British, awful 1940s, what are called quota quickies, which is that in this country, for a while, cinema was subsidized. So all these film companies were making B movies just to make money. And there was no care or attention going into them. They were just churning them out. So he was in those. Then he was in the Hammer films. He went to Europe and was in those crazy Mario Bava and Jess Franco films. And then in the 70s, he was in LA and Hollywood. And actually, when you look at his career, it feels more like a kind of crazy patchwork quilt. I was always going to do it so that each section felt completely distinct. And it almost felt like kind of chapters and was a very different style, a very different feeling. Because his career was so mad, I wanted the film to feel mad. And the character that people know as Christopher Lee, which I think, it was interesting, we had to focus in on it when we were getting the puppet died. It was like, what Christopher Lee is he going to be? He was in the public eye for 8 decades. And I think that the Christopher Lee that people actually most think about is not really the Dracula one. I think it's the kind of 1970s one. Maybe he was just making more films then, or maybe it's like the Scaramanga kind of thing. But when you think Christopher Lee, I think you do think grey hair, dark at the sides, that kind of age. And so I never wanted it to be straightforward, ever, because I just thought it'd be boring. He's not alive, so there couldn't be a central interview in that kind of way. So my original idea for the narration was always for it to be very strange. And I always wanted him to be back from the grave. And I always wanted to script the narration. In fact, I was very upset, and it's a good film, but I was very upset when Mark Cousins came out with that Hitchcock film where he did the same thing. He got an impersonator and he wrote a script. And I was like, oh, I'm doing that. But my original kind of inspiration for how the narration was going to be was there's this fantastic advert on TV here, probably 20 years ago. You can see it on YouTube. And it was a very famous British comedian called Bob Monkhouse, who was a legendary comedian of the old style, the kind of suits and kind of punchlines. And the advert comes on and it's Bob Monkhouse, but it's 3 years after he's died. And the advert starts, he's in a graveyard and he's, hey, Bob Monkhouse here. I died 3 years ago. And it was really, I watched it when we started making the film, and even now it really stands up. It was very early kind of CGI kind of manipulation. And they used clips of him and they put him into the graveyard, and they used an impersonator and they manipulated lips and stuff. And it was an advert about prostate cancer, about checking, because that's what he died of. And he tells jokes the whole way through, and it's really well done. And I thought that is really what I want to do. I want that Christopher Lee from the 1970s, who we know, the kind of very authoritative, kind of slightly wry. I want him narrating his story from the grave. It was a very long process to get to the puppet, because we did try CGI and all of that deep fake stuff was really happening at that point. And we did some tests. We got a guy in and we did some tests. But firstly, it looked creepy. There's something weird about it that just didn't quite sit right. Maybe we could have ironed the kinks out, but it didn't feel right. And then secondly, John Landis screamed at me, and just was like, you can't do that. It's disrespectful to Chris. You can't do that. And at the end of it, I was just like, okay, fine. What are our other options? And Hank was the person who suggested puppets, and we looked at all kinds of different things. There's a guy here who makes these amazing paper puppets that are kind of like very satirical looking, and he can animate. He it's not animation. He puppets them live, but they're made of paper and they look amazing. We tried some of that, but eventually we incredible company, Arch Model Studios, who do all of Wes Anderson's. They did all of Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Fox and They did Frank and Weenie for Tim Burton. And they are lovely people, brilliant. And they love old horror films. They came on board, just made that amazing Marionette. I wanted it to be a patchwork of styles. I wanted it to always be surprising, to always be strange, to have a very weird tone to it. And I wanted it to feel quite irreverent. It's just about it not being boring. And as a filmmaker, the biggest criticism I get for all of my films is how much talking heads footage I use, because I really love talking heads. It's just my favorite thing. But if I'd left my own devices, usually I would make something show up, which is 9 hours long, talking heads of people in different languages and stuff. But I have learned over the years what the audience is like, and I've got into that, and I've become more adventurous. And on this film, it was just like, let's pull all the stops out and let's make it really fun. And I think it is.
Did you always have Peter Serafinowicz in mind for the voice?
Always. He was my first choice. And the funny thing is that I'd never seen him do it. I didn't know if he could do it or not. I assumed he wouldn't have taken the job if he didn't think he could do it. So we didn't know until he sat down in the recording booth on the first day. We didn't know what the voice was going to be. And me and him worked on it a little bit, but it's amazing. He was always first choice, but not just because he's a great impersonator, but he has that voice and he's got a deep, sonorous voice. So it made immediate sense to me that he would be the guy to do it. But also, the thing that was important actually in the film, because there's so much of the narration, was that what Peter does is so different. It's not, impersonations are very different to performances. He does a performance. And it's funny reading the reviews that are starting to come out now, because some people are like, it's a spot on thing. I forgot that it was Peter Serafinowicz and it just sounded like Christopher Lee. But the truth is, it's not about being technically bang on the money, because impersonations always have a level of exaggeration to them. Anyone could do a Christopher Lee impersonation. It's not hard, but it's a joke. It's not how he actually talked. You exaggerate yourself to sound like his kind of manner. But what Peter did really was he got the spirit of him and he got the tone right, which meant that in the more serious moments, it doesn't feel jokey at all. And he's able to be funny at times, serious at times, and everything, the whole kind of spectrum in between. He was just amazing. He really was amazing. And it was fascinating, like watching him work and watching him sustain that performance. I think we did 4 sessions with him to get it, but it's amazing. He's as hilarious as you would expect as well. Like I don't know if you've seen his show, like you can see most of his, it's all up on YouTube, but he's just one of the funniest people in this country anyway. So it's great.
I know you have some of Christopher Lee's relatives in the movie. How do they feel about this documentary and maybe some of the ones that didn't appear?
It's really weird making documentaries because you work really hard to get people into the studio and then you do the interviews, and the interview, you've experienced this, but over the course of even just an hour, you form a relationship with somebody, and it can feel like friendship as well. And it can feel really deep. Harriet and Juan, who are in the film, we've not, as far as I know, we've not actually heard back from either of them. So we sent it to them to watch. We don't know if they've watched it. We don't know. But that genuinely happens a lot. It's really weird, but it does. The whole of Real Britannia, we interviewed all these legendary filmmakers, and they were great, and they all came in and they all did these fantastic interviews. And then when it was done, we sent the screeners out to everybody. I think we got a couple of replies, but that was it. So I don't know. Yeah, but it'd be interesting. I would love to know. It'd be interesting to find out, but yeah, we just don't know yet.
You talked about that Hitchcock documentary, which I remember seeing theatrically years and years ago. How many years have you been working on this Lee project?
That was the Mark Cousins one.
Oh, because there was one a few years ago where they had an impersonator telling stories with Hitchcock's voice, quote unquote.
Oh, okay. Maybe I missed that. No, it wasn't the Hitchcock Truffaut one.
No, I'll have to look up the title for you. But yeah, I remember the Hitchcock impersonator was just dead on. It sounded so good.
Oh, I don't know if that's the same film then, because the Mark Cousins one only came out It couldn't have even been more than 18 months at the most. But it's worth saying. It's interesting.
My mother scared me when I was 3 months old. She said, "Boo."
Name, Hitchcock, Alfred. Height, 5'6". Weight, prisoner refuses to make a statement. Here's his record. 1940, picked up on suspicion. 1944, notorious. 1955, rear window. 1956, the man who knew too much.
Well, sir, I admit it ain't a good record, but I'm trying to do better.
Better, appearing on television.
I'm sorry, sir, but my family was hungry.
Take him away.
Wait a minute, sir. You've got the wrong man.
And now for our first contestant.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Alfred Hitchcock Lookalike Contest.
Yeah, because this movie, you announced it on Kickstarter, it feels like just a few months ago, and then boom, it's in my inbox. I'm like, this is crazy how fast this came together.
When we did the Kickstarter, it was already finished. The Kickstarter was to raise money to put the Blu-ray together because the industry's in a really weird state right now. I don't know how much you know about all the crap that's going on, but the industry's never been in as bad a state as it is this year. Everyone is suffering. I don't know anyone who's doing it right now, and us included, even if we were doing okay. The problem we've had on this film is that we lost a US deal quite early on. We had a US deal. It wasn't finalized and it fell through. But we'd already started making a film. We'd already sold to other territories, so we were committed to deliver the film. And that has made things incredibly difficult. But we finished. The film is done. But these days, it's quite hard to sell the rights to things. Even though we've got a physical media kind of boom, I don't know if it's just documentary, but there's not a lot of interest in putting stuff out. And when you do get offers from companies who do Blu-rays, they're usually so low that it's I don't want to say like it's offensive, but you're not going to make any money out of it because creative accounting and all of that kind of stuff. In this industry, if you don't get money up front, you're never going to get money. That's just how it works. And that's depressing. And I knew that there was a big audience of people who would want to own this film on physical media. And I've put stuff out. I put my first film out by myself. I self-released that on DVD. Yeah, me and Hank just decided, you know what, we'll hold on to the Blu-ray rights and we'll just do it ourselves. So the Kickstarter was about raising enough money to put together a really great Blu-ray. And it's awesome. I think we deliver in December, but it's just beautiful. You get a kind of coffin. It comes in a wood coffin. And you get all kinds of the things are starting to kind of come in now. We just got this just came in dead luckily to see that. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. Wow.
It's really cool. We've had so much cool stuff when we got glow in the dark sticker sheet.
Holy cow. Oh, that's awesome. There's the Wicker Man one with the hair everywhere. I love it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we got heavy metal one.
Yeah, and that kind of Batman thing with the cape. That's awesome. Wow.
So it's fun. You can still pre-order it on Kickstarter. And yeah, if you get the box set, you get foil prints and stickers, badges, postcards, and we do art cards from the Dave McKean section, which we should talk about the animation. And yeah, all kinds of extra fun. You actually, in fact, Arch Model Studios, who made the puppet, they're making a bust. You get a bust of Christopher Lee based on the puppet design. And it's the only way you're going to get it. I think they're only making 300 of them. So it's a really cool box set. So that was what the Kickstarter was about making like a really great physical media thing for people who are like real fans and really into it.
Yeah, that's the thing I love about your work, John, is there are some people where the packaging is fantastic and everything looks great. And then you watch the movie and you're like, eh. And then there are some people where they make fantastic movies and you watch those and the package is just a plain thing with maybe a postcard inside. And you're on both sides. You're making fantastic films that always, I've never seen anything of yours that doesn't look incredibly professional. And then the packaging that you do, we talked about Morons from Outer Space with the film can and the book and all. I mean, every time you put out something, it's like a big deal and I love it.
I really appreciate that. It's, as a filmmaker, it amuses me, if anything, but I fall between two camps, which is financially probably a shame, which is that I'm in two separate camps. I'm a film geek and I love all of the trappings of film geekdom, but I'm also quite a serious filmmaker in terms of actually when I make films, I take it seriously and I want them to have intelligence and I want to have depth. Problem is that I get lumped in because I make films generally about films or about pop culture subjects. And because they're not low budget, like medium budget, but I get lumped into that whole fan documentary movement. I don't want to criticize them, but they are what they are, but I'm not that. So what has happened is that the people who desperately want to see my films are a different type of film geek, and they're very disappointed because they expect to see things which are going to be very standard documentaries and which are going to be lots of anecdotes about the thing that they love particularly. This very much goes back to actually 1976, the film I did nominally about Star Wars. And then the people who I've really made the documentary for, who are a much more traditional documentary audience, they all completely avoid it because it looks like a fan film. So I've got the fans who are excited about it and they watch it and they go, it's just people being really emotional and deep. And then I've got the people who would really enjoy that aspect of it going, why would I be interested in a documentary about Christopher Lee? I've got this very niche audience, which is basically you, right? Which are like intelligent, cultured film fans. Really small market.
An audience of one. I love it.
It's pretty much, the great thing actually is like when I get to do the press, it is like people like you and people like Heath from Serial at Midnight and people who are just so actually passionate about film beyond fucking Star Wars, Marvel films. It's so great to talk to people like you who are into it, who are passionate about it, who get it, and who have frames of reference for everything that I'm doing. The good thing about the modern age is that streamers need a lot of content and they don't care about reviews. They just care about hits. They just care about how many people actually click on these things. My stuff it makes money for people and it means that I get commissioned to make more stuff. But I don't think I have profile. But yeah, I am excited about geeky stuff. So when I retain the rights to things or when I self-publish books, things like that, I will always go out of my way to do just a ridiculous package and to work with great people to make great products because that's what I want on my shelf. Like I know what a film geek wants on their shelf. And this Blu-ray is going to be killer. It was so much fun, like designing the coffin boxes and stuff. The stuff that we're coming up with is ridiculous, but it's so much fun.
You mentioned Dave McKean before, but tell me more about some of these artists that you worked with to come up with these different sections.
So Dave McKean is the most famous. People who don't know Dave, he was the guy who worked with, I think he's most famous for working with Neil Gaiman on Sandman. He did all the covers for the whole run of Sandman. And he has that kind of photo realistic, airbrushy kind of mad style. And he's also a filmmaker in his own right. He did Mirror Mask, which was incredible, but nobody saw, I don't think. Luna. And he's done great album covers. He did that Counting Crows, This Desert Life. And he's just this great artist and illustrator. When I did my Méliès book, I did book about Georges Méliès. I self-published this kind of stuff all the time. And he bought a copy. And I saw it was his name. And I was just like, oh my God, Dave McKean is buying this. And I sent him a message. I actually sent him a load of extra stuff. Because one of my old friends had been just obsessed with Dave McKean. And it forced me to look at all of Dave McKean's work. And he took his own life. And it was a kind of a very sad thing. But I basically wrote to Dave when I had his email and just said, look, I'm sending you some extra stuff. And I'm doing this because of my friend Ollie, who was obsessed with you. And I wanted to put Ollie's name in front of him and do something for Ollie. And Dave wrote about this lovely email. And he basically said, if I'd known you were doing a book about Méliès, I would have loved to have been involved. And if you ever have a project which you think I'd be interested in, get in touch. So with this one, I thought he might be interested in this. So we got into touch. And he was like, I am interested, but I'm really busy. And I was like, hey, don't worry, that's fine. And he said, look, I want to do something. So send me the script and let me know all the sections that are going to be animated. And I'll find something that I can do. no problem whatsoever. So sent him the script, and basically our dream came true, which is that he loved the script and he chose the biggest animated section because he just wanted to do it. And it's a section about Tolkien. And he said, what are your thoughts? And I said, I have no thoughts. Do exactly what you want. You've got the script. We at least had the guide track recorded at that point. We certainly supplied him with Peter's voice before he was finished. And I just said, do whatever you want. You're David Keane. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And halfway through, he sent an animatic through. And we were like, we could already put the animatic in the film. So like, it's really good. And then we saw the finished piece, and it was just so incredible. And we had no expectation. I didn't know what he would deliver. But like, he went off and he did a whole studio shoot for it. And he animated it and he filmed it and he wrote his own score for it. And it's amazing. And it uses all different styles. Just his section uses all different styles of animation. And it's probably one of the two big emotional moments in the whole film. I don't want to give too much away, but it's about his kind of connection to Tolkien, but it's also about ill health. And he just delivered this gorgeous thing. So that was amazing. The opening sequence is animated by a stop motion animator called Astrid Goldsmith, who is amazing. I've known her for years. I've always wanted to work with her. So it's great to be able to just give her some work and see what she could do. I knew I wanted that in the style of Terry Gilliam. And our co-producer, Chloe Hancock, she's incredibly well connected with artists in general. And she found a whole load of recent graduates from Goldsmiths and from other art schools who are like graduates in animation. So we looked to their showreels. They're incredible because animation is moving along. The way digital technology is moving, and with AI as well to some degree, like animation is moving so fast, and actually younger people are the most connected to it. So even though they're not established names, the work they're turning out was stunning. Yeah, she got a load of people and we looked through their showreels and we chose who they were and decided what would be appropriate sections for them. Gave them a little bit more guidance, I think. But generally, if you're working with good people, at least for the first shot, you should just let them go and show you what they can do. So yeah, loads of different animators, loads of different little sections. And I just, I'm blown away by it, really.
Yeah, it all looked so good. And even though it is a lot of different artists, it all feels of a piece. And like you said, that quilt that makes up his life, it's just incredible.
Yeah, it was very important to me because the section, his military section in particular, was going to be difficult because there's not a lot of photos even of him from that time. And it's such a significant part of his life. And this is a big, important section. I grew up reading those kind of weird war comics. I'm sure you've got versions of them in the States. In this country, they were all based on World War II. It was all kind of Eagle and Commando and stuff. And there's this great 2000 AD artist who we've used before for a few things called Simon Colby. I just said to him, you've got to turn this story into a full comic. In fact, we're going to put the comic in the box set as well now. But we had to literally frame by frame work out how we were going to tell this entire story. He did a beautiful job with that. And then we've got this great animator called Pants who also did our title sequence where all the Christopher Lee's getting killed in different ways. He took the comic art and he made the whole thing kind of 3D and dynamic, and that just turned out so well. Because it's really scary when you're doing these edits. You have like 3 minutes of dialogue to cover that. You have to find something to fill that. That could be the hardest. When you've made a documentary, when you know how the sausage is made, whenever you watch documentaries on TV, you can see when filmmakers are being lazy and stuff. And you can see when they just have a random photo and they go, oh God, let's do a really slow zoom into it because we've got 30 seconds of dialogue that's got to be covered up. And it's the hardest part of editing documentaries. So yeah, with the animations, it was always the step up, and it's always a bit scary because there was so much stuff that had to be covered. But it just turned out so well. And I'm not saying that in an arrogant way. I'm saying that because we hired people who just did an amazing job, and it's beautiful.
As someone who chases down interview subjects all the time, I have to compliment you on just the caliber of interviews you were able to get for this. Just incredible. And to hear these stories, to hear Landis talking about, can you keep a secret, Jon? Like those kind of things, just wonderful. I don't have a question. I'm just giving you a compliment.
That compliment is for Hank. Hank gets the interview. That's not me at all. That is Hank. I knew Landis anyway, so I did get Landis. But everyone else is down to Hank. And he's just really good at getting people. But we've also got, at this point, we've got a body of work where even if people haven't heard of us, when we list the people who have been in our other films, people get that we're serious about it. And the other thing that we do, which a lot of low and medium budget productions don't do, is we always pay people, which even if they're very rich, wealthy people, they take you seriously. If you say there is a fee, they go, okay, it's more professional. And we very rarely go to people's houses. Like it can be very invasive. Some people want you to go to their house and then it's okay, fine, if you're actually asking us to. But I think quite often if a low budget or low to medium budget documentary gets in touch with people, there's a kind of, oh God, I don't know who these people are. I don't know if they're professional. They want to come to my house. So Hank is incredibly professional. He's also called Hank Stars, which he thinks is the charm, because people just want to talk to someone called Hank Stars. And Hank's a great name. People like saying Hank. So when they find out, they go, hey, Hank. And I think that's all kind of part of it. But we've got a really great crew. We shoot in a really good studio, which is a studio complex. So there are proper makeup rooms and green rooms and technical rooms and stuff. And as soon as someone comes into one of our productions, we have a small team, but we have a friendly and professional team. And they really respond. It's okay. They feel comfortable. If they come in nervous, we also have kind of a largely female team as well. So it's not an oppressive situation for kind of women coming in as well. And my style of interviewing is it's not aggressive. It's more kind of based on listening and responding and seeing where the interview goes. Because with the films, I'm very open to how the film presents itself and what comes out of it. So with the interviews, I never go in with an expectation. I never go in with an agenda. I have a clipboard with questions on. I very rarely have to ask those questions. It's usually just making them comfortable enough to speak about what they want to speak about on and around the subject. And then at the end of that, you edit and you find out what you've got and you pull it out of there. I think we've got a good reputation within the industry. And if people are nervous, we can send them copies of our films and they go, oh, okay, it's serious. For me, Real Britannia was the one I could believe when Hank, the caliber of filmmakers that were coming in every day was insane. And as a kind of film geek, kind of British film geek in particular, I really had to check my head because some days you're doing 3 interviews and you're just, okay, here comes Stephen Frears, here comes Ken Loach. Oh, and we've got Terry Gilliam at the end of the day. And you just have to go, okay, I need to put my entire personality in a box and I need to be just professional and just engage with them on a professional level. But so at this point, we're quite comfortable with that kind of thing.
When it was so nice too to not hear the same stories that you hear all the time. I love the stories. I love the story of Peter Jackson talking about how Christopher Lee was like, oh no, this is how it sounds like when you stab a man.
When Wormtongue rises up and comes up behind Saruman to stab him, of course it was my job as director to talk to Christopher Lee and to explain to him what I wanted. So I started to go into this long explanation about what sort of sound he should make when he got stabbed.
I seem to recall that I did say to Peter, have you any idea of what kind of noise happens when somebody is stabbed in the back? And I said, well, because I do.
Oh, yeah. You see, it's not, I like that.
It's because the breath's driven out of your body.
He proceeded to sort of talk about some very clandestine part of World War II.
He used to be in the British Secret Service, whatever they were called, the OSS.
He seemed to have expert knowledge of exactly the sort of noise that they make, and so I just sort of didn't push the subject any further. I just said, well, you obviously know what to do, Christopher, so I'm sure you'll do it great, and he did.
those are great stories, but you're getting so much more out of these folks with these tales that they're telling, and just the connection that, sorry to harp on Jackson, but the connection between Jackson and Lee, just, you could feel that genuineness and just how important that role was to him.
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on there. This is probably about 8 years ago. I used to work at the BFI, British Film Institute, interviewing people. And the thing that I realized really quickly is that, firstly, most people have a handful of stories that they're comfortable telling, and it's very well rehearsed. And if they're in a press cycle, they also have bits that a lot of being interviewed people is going onto autopilot. And I'm sure you find that at times. And the other thing that I found is that at the BFI is that I'd have to research the interviews quite quickly. And literally you watch 3 YouTube interviews and you go, oh, they've told the exact same stories. Yeah, which is something I'm guilty of as well, because when you're publicizing something, that's what you do. So I've always had this policy of going, if the story is out there and it's on YouTube, it's not going to go in my film. There's no point of it being out there, because the fans, who are the main people who watch it, already have access to that. So I will always, if they try and give me the kind of rehearsed stuff, I let them talk themselves out. And then I just stay quiet and encouraging. And Hank always describes it as, there's a moment in my interviews about half an hour in where people have told all of their rehearsed stuff and they look at me as, what do you want from me? And like a thin layer of sweat develops. And actually, my technique is based on my experience of therapy, which is that if you give someone a comfortable, welcoming environment where they feel safe, eventually they'll get off autopilot and they'll get to a place of intimacy, and they'll get to a place of something they care about, and they become much more real. And that's always what I'm trying to do in every interview. The Peter Jackson one blew my mind, because firstly, I wasn't sure that there were stories that hadn't been told, because the Lord of the Rings has been so documented. And like you say, that story about stabbing someone, that's the one that always comes out. I had heard the story about, again, I don't want to spoil the film for people. A lot of the film actually is about, if you want, like, thematically what the film is about, is the idea that Christopher Lee is the ultimate kind of authoritative figure, and the projection that he's given through all of his films and through his personal life is this tall, imposing, erudite, clever, confident, wealthy, prominent man. And actually the truth is, when you talk to people who knew him really well, he was deeply insecure and fragile. And he was also driven by a kind of unexplainable, like, his work ethic is something that people didn't really understand, because he made a lot of really shit films, really bad films. I'm not being a dick about it. Like, I've watched them, and almost half of, I think Joe Dante in the film says, almost half of Christopher Lee's films are completely forgettable and complete rubbish. He was always amazing in them. He never gave a bad performance in a film, ever. But he was in a lot of really bad films. And to me, that was what was always interesting, was this notion of kind of fragility. And we got that in all of the interviews. We got to the point where they would talk about his fragility and his insecurities. And I think Peter Jackson's were almost more surprising than anyone else's. Because at the point, that's what I love, is he talks about it, about how he was surprised. Because you're bringing Christopher Lee in, and you're thinking, here is this guy who is a genuine legend to cinema. We're all nervous around him. And yet he finds out very quickly that Christopher Lee is more nervous than he was. So I love it. There's actually, I'll tell you a little story. In the film, we interview Juan Aneros, who was Christopher Lee's son. We had contacted the family early on, and Hank spoke to Gita, to Christopher's widow, and she basically said, look, we've agreed. Before he died, he basically said he didn't want us to do interviews about him. So it's not something we're going to get involved with. But I wish you really well with it. I can tell that you guys are serious. I can tell you'll make a great film. Certainly not going to tell us not to make the film. We promise not to speak to people, so we can't be involved in that way. And at one point, I decided that I really wanted to cover his heavy metal phase, which is something which people find it very funny, and in the film it has its funny moments. But the truth is, he took it very seriously, and he made a couple of very reputable albums, and also appeared on a bunch of other heavy metal artist stuff, which was really in a really good way. So I said to Hank, can you track down anyone who worked with him? And let's see if we can introduce some people about heavy metal. And Juan, it turned out, had played a prominent role in his personal heavy metal projects. So Hank got in touch with him and he was like, yeah, I'll be happy to come over and do an interview and I'll bring a couple of the musicians and that'll be great. And 2 days before he came over, we were talking to our consultant, Jonathan Rigby, who's Lee's biographer. And he said, how's it going? What are you up to? What's happening? And we said, we're interviewing this guy from his heavy metal project, Juan Aneros. And Rigby went, that's his son-in-law. And we were like, what? And he was like, yeah, that's Christopher Lee's son-in-law. And it was like, oh, he didn't tell us that. And we've paid for a flight and he's coming over. But okay, that's weird. So the night before, we went for a drink with Hank and he admitted to it. He said, I am his son, but I'm here to talk about the heavy metal project, not to talk as his son. We said, that's completely fine. And so I met him the next day when we were getting ready to do the interview. I said to him, don't worry, we'll just do heavy metal stuff. So we did the interview. He was absolutely great. And in the interview, he did say a few things which were not about the heavy metal project, which were a bit more personal. And when we finished the interview, the other two guys left and he said, listen, I really trust you. And I've talked to Christina, who was Chris Lee's daughter, and we agreed that if I trusted you, I would offer you an interview as son-in-law. So if you're son-in-law, I'll do that. And I was like, that would be amazing. He said, great. So we did a second interview with him. And actually, when you see it in the film, the bit where I don't want to spoil the ending at all, but he's got tears in his eyes. And in fact, everyone in the director of photography was sobbing behind the camera at one point of it. And it was a very emotional, and he was very raw and very open. And at the end of the interview, everyone had wet eyes. And we gave each other a hug. And it was really nice. And I said to him, listen, I'm not going to put anything in the film that you don't want me to put in the film. I would never do that. So anything you want, just know that you can talk to us. We won't put stuff in that you don't. And he was like, that is completely fine. I think everything I said, I'd stand by. So I think it'll be fine. And as he was leaving, he goes, got something for you. He was like, okay. He said, before I left Spain, me and Christina were watching videos of you on YouTube of interviews that you've done. And we were saying you look a lot like Peter Jackson. And I was just like, okay, thank you. I've heard that before. And he said, I want to give you something. And he opens up his bag and he gives me Peter Jackson's original crew jacket from Lord of the Rings. And he was like, Peter gave this to Christopher. Obviously, it wouldn't fit Christopher, but we feel it would fit you. We feel like if I had a good time, I would give it to you. So he's given me that. It's just like amazing. I don't know what to do with it. Obviously, we're going to get it framed at some point and hang it somewhere in our house. But it was, you really, if you take this stuff seriously, and you know this because you're a great interviewer, if you take it seriously and you treat people like human beings, you can really build relationships with them. And even if I've never spoken to Juan since, but if I saw him in the street, I would give him a hug. And I think that's true of life. I think there are people who will be your friends for life, who maybe you just spent one great night with and had one great conversation with, but you made that connection. And because of that, you will always trust those people and you'll always care about those people. And I think that's what I'm always striving for in every interview I do. I'm striving to make a connection, which is really real and really honest and really trusting. And like I say, all the films I've made, there are people who I interviewed for one day 15 years ago who, in my first film, I interviewed my friend Jamie. I'd never met him before. He'd been in a band. My first film was about the music scene in Oxford, Radiohead and Supergrass. And there'd been a band that I'd loved growing up called the Daisies, and they were a natural part of the story. So I tracked down their lead singer and he said he'd give me an interview. And the interview was so good that he played guitar at my wedding and he's done the music for all of my films. He's the composer. He does the score for all of my films. And his score for the Christopher Lee film is wonderful. Like the opening title music, I love it so much. And that came out of an interview. That came out of sitting down in a room for an hour and a half and having an honest connection and conversation. It can be really meaningful if you allow it.
So when did you actually lock this picture?
We had to deliver it. I think we locked it in January. It was supposed to come out in March because Sky, the broadcaster in the UK who funded it, and they were originally going to release it in March. So we definitely delivered it in time for March. And then they decided that they actually wanted to hold on to it for Halloween because they loved it. And they've now bought a whole load of Christopher Lee films. So they're programming like a whole kind of season around it. So yeah, I think it's been locked since January. I think that's right.
And then you've done some theatrical screenings already.
We had our premiere about 2 weeks ago here, which was amazing, at the Odeon Leicester Square, which is the biggest cinema in the UK. And we're about to do one at the BFI. So part of the thing that's been confusing about this film is the way that you sell films is really weird. You sell it in territories. And I think there are 80 territories worldwide. If you sell a film to America, you make enough money to make film. That's a really big sale. But if you sell it to Hong Kong, you get £1,000. So it's really weird, the kind of sizes stuff. And because we lost our American deal before we finalized it, we had already sold to, I think it was Spain and Scandinavia. I think they had bought it quite early on. And because Sky were originally going to release it in March, that was where the contracts went. And the thing that's really weird as filmmakers is this is all done by sales agents. Your point, it's quite boring stuff. You appoint a sales agent, they go out and make the sales, they take a commission, you get the rest of the money. But sometimes a distributor, I would have thought if I was a distributor, I would be in touch with the filmmakers. I just would, even for publicity, for interviews, whatever. But some, they really don't. I guess they just show it on TV or they just do what they do with it. And they're not contracted to tell you anything. Once they've bought it, you can specify in the contract a holdback for when it's released. So it came out in Spain without us even realizing it. It was really weird. It's just one day a review appeared and it was in Spanish. It was like, oh, it's on TV in Spain. And it's not going to be out in this country for like months and months. So it has had screenings. I saw that one happened in Helsinki the other day. But it's so weird, but you just don't find out about these things. You really have to be able to let something go. But you could get really worked up and upset about it. Like the idea that you're going to have it as like a cinema release in this country or in America, and then it's already out on TV in Spain. You just have to go, fine. It's so out of my hands by that point that it's almost surreal. I don't know where it's shown. It has definitely shown in some places around the world. And it was showing a lot more. We sold quite a lot of territories on it. Apart from America, I have no idea what's going on with America, but all this stuff that's happening with the streamers right now is affecting mid-level, mid-budget stuff. The middle is getting squeezed. So they're still making it committed to these very expensive shows. And Lord knows if you're prepared to make a true crime documentary for $20, they will buy it. But everyone in the middle is really getting screwed at the moment. So I got no idea when it'll be out in the States. It's really weird to say that, but but I've got no idea.
Will we be able to buy it on Blu-ray when that's available?
You can buy it right now on Blu-ray. It'll come out in December, but you can pre-order it on the Kickstarter website. So if you just search Kickstarter for Christopher Lee, Life and Death of Christopher Lee, it's got a pre-order link and you can order it now. And we'll send it in December anywhere in the world. So yeah. So the actual film geeks will still get a chance to get hold of it.
What kind of projects are you working on now?
This year has been the strangest year of my career because we are usually making something. We're usually at some level of production and we just aren't right now. We have been pitching for a year and stuff keeps getting very close and not happening. So that's been interesting. In itself, we actually had a big project that we really thought was about to go ahead and at the last minute it fell through. All this stuff could still happen. Once you've all the pitch together and you've made a deck, it's still there and the sales agent has it ready to take people. So all this stuff could still happen. But I've taken a step back from it because of that. And we're talking about making our first drama, basically, which has kind of a Christopher Lee link. I started my career as a screenwriter in my 20s on a very bad science fiction TV show called Lex.
I remember Lex. I watched quite a few episodes of that.
It was a Canadian softcore science fiction show. It was great. It really was a great show. It was bad, but it was good. So I haven't done screenwriting for a long time. But then I realized actually writing this film, the whole film was a screenplay. It was written, it was authored, and it was a character as well. It was writing for a character. Yeah, me and Hank have been talking for a long time about making a move into drama, or at least trying to make some drama. And it's a really fun idea that we've got. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm about 3 weeks away from the first draft being finished. Really happy with that. So I'm hoping that'll happen. I'm writing a book. I'm always writing books. Although it's my first fiction book that I'm writing, it's the first novel that I'm writing. So I'm keeping busy, and it's quite liberating because it's stuff that's almost, you have to work to live. But I've given up on the fact that this year I'm not going to make my usual kind of salary from making a film. The good thing about making films is that once you've made a few, royalties kick in, territories to renew things. So it's always like little bits of money just when you're absolutely almost at the door kind of thing. But it's been really fun so far this year, actually, to be to the grindstone, working on something with a deadline and just being a bit more creative and kind of following the muse a little bit, to sound very pretentious. That's pretty much how my year is shaping up. But if at any moment one of our pitches actually gets picked up, we would go into production.
My wife and I always talk about how Max von Sydow dies in so many of the movies that he's in, and some spectacular deaths, especially you think about Ming the Merciless, right? Oh. But other great deaths as well. Can I pitch you the life and deaths of Max von Sydow?
The problem with that is you definitely could, but I feel like I've just made that film. Do you know what I mean? This was the first film I've made that was just about one person. All of my documentaries have been about groups of people, communities and stuff. It was really interesting to do one about one person. But I feel like my response to how I would do a film about Max von Sydow would probably be quite similar to how I would have done Christopher Lee. So, yeah, probably not. But that's a film for somebody to make. Maybe. I will say on the Max von Sydow thing, on the Flash Gordon, the Merciless thing, before he died, I made good friends with Mike Hodges, obviously through the Morals Fast, his connection. And he and I were working on a book when he died, and we'd actually finished it, which is a book of correspondence, basically. And because we were sending each other a lot of emails, we thought it'd be really interesting for me to interview him by email, but for it to be more conversational in the idea that I was a filmmaker who was essentially near the beginning of my career, and he was at the end of his career. So it's very interesting to compare experiences and just see where the conversation went. And also really to interview him substantially and to find out about, because one thing about filmmakers that people don't realize is the most interesting thing is to talk to them about the projects that didn't get made. Like no one ever interviews people about the projects that did. Jodorowsky's Dune is probably the great exception. But nobody interviews people about the films that didn't get made. And usually filmmakers are more passionate about those, and those stories are more exciting. So that reminded me that that's a book which at some point I have to put together and actually format it into the shape of a book and find a way to get that out in the world. So yeah, that reminded me about that. Because we all love Flash Gordon.
Sorry to put another thing on your to-do list.
Well, it's fine. I like doing things.
Jon, it is always such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Mike. I was so excited that we were going to have another conversation. And hit me up for other filmy things.
Okay, we'll do.
There's many other films that we should have very in-depth discussions about.
I would love that. I'm working on the 2025 schedule, so I can send that your way and see if anything appeals.
Look, if you liked Christopher Lee, I would love to talk about The Return of Captain Invincible, a great
Yeah, we had Philippe Mora on the show, and I bet you would be game for doing that.
How did I miss that one? What episode was that?
That was Communion.
Oh my God. That's what I'll be listening to tonight.
I hope you enjoy it, sir.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you, John. Always great talking with you. You take care now.
An old cowpoke went riding out one dark and windy day. Upon a ridge he rested as he went along his way. When all at once a mighty herd of red-eyed cows he saw, a-plowing through the rugged skies and up a cloudy draw. Yippee-yi-yi, yippee-yi-oh, the ghost herd in the sky. The brands were still on fire and their hooves was made of steel. Their horns was black and shiny and their hot breath he could feel. A bolt of fear went through him as they thundered through the sky, for he saw the riders coming on, and he heard their mournful cry. Yippee-yi-yi, yippee-yi-oh, the ghost riders in the sky. Their faces gaunt, their eyes were blurred, and shirts all soaked in sweat. They're riding hard to catch that herd, but they ain't caught them yet. 'Cause they've got to ride forever on that range up in the sky, on horses snorting fire. As they ride on, hear their cry. Yippee-yi-yi, yippee-yi-oh, the ghost riders in the sky. As the riders loped on by him, he heard one call out his name. If you want to save your soul from hell, riding on our range, then cowboy, change your ways today, or with us you will ride, trying to catch the devil's herd across these endless skies. Yippee-yi-yi, yippee-yi-oh,